In the heart of a raging snowstorm, a fragile little girl clutches her newborn brother, her eyes filled with fear and despair. Her trembling footsteps imprint the frozen white until she collapses amid the howling winds. But in that fateful moment, a mysterious man and his loyal dog appear, changing everything forever. Subscribe to our channel now so you won't miss the most emotional and thrilling stories we bring to you. The world was white, not the soft postcard kind of white that children dream of, where snow drapes rooftops and whispers of sled rides and cocoa. No, this white was merciless. It swallowed the mountains whole, smothered the trees, erased the sky. It was a white that howled and clawed and bit into the flesh until even breathing felt like drowning. The storm had no face, no name, only a hunger that devoured everything in its path. Through the blur of snow, a small figure staggered forward. Hannah Miller, 10 years old, her hair clotted with ice. Her lashes heavy with frost, clutched a bundle tighter against her chest. The bundle moved barely. Inside the faded quilt lay her baby brother Noah, no more than 2 weeks old, his tiny breaths ghosts against her collarbone. "Hannah!" The voice wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was her mother's voice, carried on memory, not on the wind. Still, it curled in her ears as though whispered right beside her. "Confai tim ngui tot, Hannah. Dung quai lai." Her mother's last words. A plea, a command, a prayer. Hannah's boots, too big for her feet, slid in the drifts. Each step sank deep snow, spilling into her socks, searing her ankles with cold. She tried to lift her knees higher, but her legs burned. The wind shrieked, slapping at her face, pulling tears from her eyes that froze before they could fall. The storm seemed endless, a beast with no body, only teeth. She whispered to Noah through chattering lips. "It's okay, baby. We're gonna find someone. I promise," Mama said. Her voice cracked, swallowed by the wind. The baby didn't cry. That terrified her more than any howl the storm could conjure. He was too quiet, too still. She shifted him closer, pressing her cheek against the quilt, trying to steal what little warmth she had left. "Please, Noah. Please stay." Her breath fogged, then vanished. She blinked through the curtain of snow. Nothing, no lights, no cabins, no roads. Just white. Her chest ached with every inhale, sharp needles digging in from the inside. She thought of the night before, her mother's face lit by the flickering lantern eyes, swollen but fierce. She'd pressed Noah into Hannah's arms, her own trembling hands fumbling to wrap the blanket tight. "Take him. Don't stop no matter what. You hear me, but Mama, don't argue. Run." Hannah had screamed, had clung to her, but then the door had slammed and a key had scraped in the lock. Behind it, the sounds she would never forget, the thunder of boots, the roar of a man's voice, the crash of furniture, and her mother's scream, raw, broken, then cut off. The memory drove her legs forward now, step after step. She had to obey. She had to make those screams mean something. The storm swelled as though it too remembered. Wind shoved her sideways, and she stumbled, clutching Noah so tight his soft whimper barely escaped the blanket. Her knees hit the snow. Cold shot through her bones. She gasped, her lips splitting, the copper taste of blood mixing with the sting of ice. She forced herself up, legs trembling like brittle sticks. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not yet." Her teeth clacked so hard she feared they'd break, but the snow deepened. Her tiny body fought, dragged against the weight. Her fingers, blue and numb, struggled to hold on. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. Her vision swam the edges, turning gray. "Noah," she breathed, pressing a kiss to the top of his damp forehead. "You hang on. Please. Someone's out here. Someone's gotta be." But in her heart, a truth gnawed. What if there wasn't? What if the world had swallowed every good person, leaving only this storm? What if she'd been sent running into a grave? Her mother's voice came again, softer now, as if carried from far away. "Confai tin. Dung so." She tried. God, she tried. She imagined a house with a fire, a kind face, a pair of hands reaching out. She imagined warmth, safety, a place where Noah could breathe without shivering, where Mama would walk through the door smiling unhurt. She clung to that picture as the world blurred around her, but her body betrayed her. Her steps slowed shorter, weaker. Her knees buckled again, this time deeper. She sank to the ground, snow engulfing her up to the waist. The blanket slipped and panic surged. She clawed at it, clutching Noah back against her chest, curling around him like a shield. The storm screamed. Her eyes closed, lashes iced shut. Her lips formed words without sound. "Mama." I tried. The cold was no longer sharp. It was soft now, almost kind. She felt herself floating, the weight easing, her arms loosening. Noah's faint breath against her skin was the only tether left. She wanted to keep holding on, but her body whispered betrayal. Just rest. Just close your eyes. The world tilted. Darkness swam at the edges. The sound of the wind faded, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like the earth itself had stopped breathing. Her mother's voice broke through one last time. Kan komat mindo, Hannah. Her head fell forward, her cheek pressing to the top of Noah's blanket. She thought she saw a shadow moving in the storm, large and steady. But maybe it was only her mind playing tricks. The snow rose higher, the wind howled, and then the Sierra Nevada storm had a way of silencing everything, even a man's heartbeat if he listened too long. Ethan Walker knew that silence well. He had lived in these mountains for 3 winters now, each colder than the last, and tonight the storm bore down with the weight of an old grudge. The wind pressed against him, pulling at the hood of his parka, slicing through the thick wool scarf wrapped around his neck. His breath left him in bursts of steam, brief and fragile in the white void. Beside him, Dane moved like shadow against snow. The German shepherd was 6 years old, a soldier in his own right, his coat black streaked with tan, his amber eyes scanning the world with a vigilance Ethan no longer trusted in himself. Dane's paws crunched over the drifts with precision, every movement sharp, every pause deliberate. When he stopped, Ethan stopped. When his ears flicked, Ethan listened. Easy boy, Ethan muttered, his voice hoarse, muffled by the wind. Just another patrol. The words weren't for Dane. They were for himself. Out here the mind could play tricks. Branches snapping under ice could sound like footsteps. The groan of the trees could sound like voices. He had to remind himself that most nights passed without incident. Most nights, it was just the storm. But not tonight. Dane stiffened his body, coiling like wire. His nose dipped low, inhaling sharp, quick bursts. His tail went rigid, straight as a flag in the gale. A low rumble rolled from his chest. Ethan's pulse spiked. "What is it?" Ethan asked, already adjusting the rifle slung across his shoulder. Though he knew Dane's answer would not be words. The shepherd pulled forward, sudden, urgent, nearly tearing the leash from Ethan's glove. "Slow down," Ethan hissed, stumbling after him. Dane didn't slow. He surged left, weaving through a line of pines bent low under the weight of snow. Ethan followed his boots, sinking past his ankles, his thighs burning as he pushed through the drifts. The world narrowed to Dane's body, the black shape against the storm leading him into a shallow gully where the wind quieted the trees, forming a jagged crown overhead. The sudden hush made Ethan's ears ring. He could hear his own breathing now, harsh and too fast. Then he saw it. At first he thought it was a scrap of fabric, a rag of red caught against the snow. But as Dane slowed and circled, Ethan's eyes sharpened. It wasn't a scrap. It was a small body curled on its side, blanketed in white, as if the earth itself was trying to claim it. Ethan's boots pounded harder, the sound deafening against the quiet of the gully. He dropped to his knees, snow soaking through his cargo pants, instantly biting his skin. "God," the word cracked in his throat. The child couldn't have been more than 10. Her lips were blue lashes encrusted in ice, one arm curled instinctively against her chest. And tucked against her body, another form, even smaller, wrapped in a quilt so thin it looked like it could shatter if he touched it. For a heartbeat, Ethan froze, the sight punching him in the chest with a force that stole his breath. Dane whined low, stepping closer, nose brushing the quilt as if urging Ethan to move. That snapped him back. Okay, I've got you," he muttered, his voice trembling despite his effort to steady it. He yanked off his gloves and pressed 2 fingers against the girl's neck. For a terrifying moment, nothing. Then a flicker. Faint, thready, but there. His chest eased just enough to keep him moving. His hand shook as he tugged the quilt's edge back from the bundle. Inside a newborn, his skin pale as milk lips parted. Ethan bent close, heart hammering, searching for the rise of a chest, the ghost of breath. There. Weak. So weak. But real. "Damn it," Ethan whispered. His throat tightened with a rush of something he hadn't felt in years, fear that wasn't for himself. "Hold on, kids. Don't you dare quit on me." He shed his parka in one swift motion, ignoring the sting of the cold on his own skin, and wrapped it around both children. He pulled them into his chest, tucking the baby tighter between the girl's body and his own heat. The girl's head lolled against him, a tiny moan escaping her frozen lips. Ethan's heart lurched. "It's all right. You're safe now," he murmured, even though he wasn't sure if she could hear. His voice cracked anyway. "I've got you. Dane paced around them, tail low ears, sharp scanning the shadows. A sentinel. He gave a sharp bark, a warning to the storm itself, as if daring it to take another step closer. Ethan forced himself up, his arms full, the children no more than fragile weight against him, yet heavier than anything he had carried in years. His legs screamed as he pushed through the snow, following Dane's lead back toward the ridge. He didn't let himself think about the distance. He didn't let himself think about the risk. He just moved. Step, breath, step. The storm clawed at them, furious, as though it knew it was losing. Snow whipped across his face, stinging his skin raw. The baby whimpered faintly, the sound barely audible, but enough to ignite something fierce inside Ethan. He held them closer. That's it. Keep making noise. Let me know you're still here. Dane stayed 10 paces ahead, his black coat a flicker against the endless white. Every so often he turned his head, checking ears, pricked eyes, glowing with urgency. Ethan trusted that look more than he trusted his own senses. Dane had saved him before, back when saving meant different things, when the battlefield had been another kind of storm. Tonight the stakes felt even higher. The climb up the ridge burned his lungs. His thighs quaked, threatening to give, but he clenched his jaw and pushed harder. He couldn't stop. Not here. Not when 2 lives were balanced against his heartbeat. He whispered again, low, steady. Almost there. Stay with me. Through the wall of white, a shape began to form. At first only a blur dark against the snow. Then lines sharpened, a roof slanted under the weight of ice. A cabin. His cabin. His sanctuary hidden deep enough in the trees that most storms passed it over. Tonight, it would have to be a miracle. Dane broke into a run, bounding up the last stretch. He barked once, sharp and commanding, the sound echoing through the clearing. Ethan's chest heaved as he followed every step, heavier. But the sight of the wooden porch, the faint curl of smoke from the chimney, drove him onward. He stumbled up the steps, clutching the children close. Dane whirled at the doornails, scratching the wood, urging him faster. Ethan shouldered inside, the gust of wind slamming the door behind them with a crack that shook the frame. The sudden warmth hit like fire. The cabin was no palace, just rough-hewn wood, a stone hearth with embers still glowing, a table scarred from years of use. But tonight, it was salvation. Ethan lowered the children onto the thick, braided rug in front of the fire, his hands trembling as he peeled the parka back. The girl stirred faintly, lashes fluttering, a whisper escaping cracked lips. Ethan leaned closer, heart stuttering. Her voice was thin, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. Mama, said to run. Ethan swallowed hard, his chest aching. He brushed damp hair back from her forehead. You did good, kid. You did real good. Beside him, Dane settled close, pressing his warm flank against the girl's legs, eyes fixed on her face, as though daring her to stop breathing. The baby gave a faint whimper, and Ethan exhaled a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt alive. And Ethan Walker, the man who had buried hope long ago, found himself whispering words he hadn't dared in a very long time. Please let them make it. The fire snapped sparks, curling upward, before dissolving into the smoke that twisted through the chimney. Outside, the storm still screamed, clawing at the cabin walls like some desperate beast. But inside, for the first time in hours, warmth began to bloom. It wrapped around the small forms on the rug like a fragile promise. Ethan crouched near the hearth, one hand stirring the logs, the other reaching toward the girl. Her face was pale lashes, trembling lips parted just enough to let out a breath. The infant nestled against her side, whimpered once the faintest sound, and Ethan leaned closer, checking his tiny chest. A rise, a fall. Slow but steady. Relief burned his throat. Hang in there, kid, he murmured. You've made it this far. Beside him, Dane stretched out, the shepherd's body pressed against the girl's legs, his fur thick and warm. His eyes never left the children, amber orbs catching the flicker of the firelight. He didn't move, didn't blink, as if the weight of their survival rested entirely on his watch. Ethan pulled an old quilt from the cedar chest near the wall, shaking out the dust, then draped it gently over the girl and her brother. He tucked the edges close, careful not to jar them. His own fingers were stiff with cold raw from the wind, but he ignored the sting. The children mattered more, always more. He poured water into a small tin mug, set it near the fire, and let the heat work. Then slowly, he returned to the girl's side. Her eyelids fluttered, a flicker of green behind the frost, still clinging to her lashes. Ethan leaned in, his voice low, steady. Hey there, you with me? For a moment, nothing. Then her eyes cracked open unfocused, darting across the ceiling beams before settling on him. Fear snapped into them instantly. She flinched, her body tensing beneath the blanket. Her hand twitched toward the baby, clutching the quilt tighter around him. "It's okay," Ethan said softly. Both palms lifted in calm surrender. "You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her breathing quickened, uneven panic sparking in every line of her face. Ethan could see it, the fight of a child who had already been asked to survive more than most grown men could bear. He knew that fight. He'd lived it once in another form. "I'm Ethan," he tried again, his voice softer, almost a whisper now. "This is my cabin. And that's Dane." He tilted his head toward the shepherd. Dane, sensing the girl's fear, lowered his head onto his paws. Ears relaxed, his body curling slightly toward her like an offering. The girl's gaze shifted, locking onto the dog. The fear wavered, if only for a breath. Ethan saw it. He leaned into that sliver of trust. "He's a good one," Ethan said. "Best I've ever known. He'll stay right here, keep you warm. He doesn't let bad things get near." Her eyes lingered on Dane, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. She blinked hard, as though forcing the world into focus, then whispered, her voice brittle as glass. "Where's Mama?" The question cut Ethan sharper than the storm outside. He swallowed hard, choosing his words with care. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But you're safe now. And your brother, too. Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated, lips trembling. Then Hannah. Her gaze flicked down to the bundle in her arms. "He's Noah." Ethan nodded, repeating the names softly, committing them to memory, like sacred vows. Hannah. Noah. Good names. Hannah clutched the baby tighter, as if afraid he might vanish. She glanced back at Ethan, suspicion still dark in her eyes. "You're not with him." The words were thin, but they carried a weight that froze Ethan in place. He crouched lower, leveling his gaze with hers. "With who?" Her lips barely moved. "Victor." The name landed heavy between them, like the crack of a rifle in the quiet. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know the man yet, but he knew enough by the way Hannah's voice shrank when she said it. He knew danger when it breathed, even through the lips of a child. "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not with him. I don't even know him. But you do, don't you?" Hannah blinked, her lashes wet now, though no tears fell. She nodded once, almost imperceptible. "He's Mama's husband. He hurt her." Her voice caught, trembling. Dane shifted closer, pressing his muzzle gently against her arm. She didn't pull away. Ethan's chest ached. He reached for the mug near the fire, tested its warmth, then held it out toward her. "Try to sip, it'll help." Hannah eyed him warily, then the mug. Her hands shook as she reached, careful not to disturb Noah. Ethan steadied the mug with one hand as she brought it to her lips. The first swallow was small, tentative. She coughed softly, then tried again, braver this time. When she lowered it, some color had returned to her cheeks. "There you go," Ethan murmured. "You're tougher than you know." Her gaze lingered on him now. Still wary, but less panicked. She studied his face like she was deciding whether he was real or just another shadow. Finally she whispered, "Mama said, find someone good. Don't go back." The words hit Ethan like a blow. He steadied himself, drawing in a breath through his teeth. "Sounds like she's smart. Brave, too." Hannah's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. Her eyes shone in the firelight, wide and haunted. She told me to run," she said. "Don't look back. She was still in the house when I left." Her voice cracked on the last word, breaking open something in Ethan he'd buried long ago. He leaned closer, lowering his tone to a vow. "Then we'll make sure she's not there alone. You hear me, Hannah? You did the hardest part already. You got Noah out. You found me. That's no small thing. That's no small..." Hannah's gaze flicked toward Dane again. The dog had shifted, resting his head gently against her knee. For the first time, a tear slid down her cheek. She whispered, almost too quiet to catch, "He feels safe." Ethan swallowed his throat thick. "He is safe. So are you." For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling low, filling the cabin with warmth. Outside, the storm battered the walls, but inside, there was light. Fragile, flickering, but real. Hannah's fingers brushed over Noah's cheek, her hand trembling. "He's so little," she whispered. I tried to keep him warm." "You did," Ethan assured her. "You saved him." He let the truth settle into the quiet. and I'll help you keep saving him. Both of you. Hannah's lips pressed tight, but she didn't argue. She only held Noah closer, leaning fractionally toward Dane's warmth. The shepherd's tail thumped once against the rug, soft, steady. Ethan sat back, his eyes lingering on the children, the fire painting gold over their fragile forms. Something inside him shifted, an old gear that had rusted with years of silence, beginning to turn again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know the full weight of the name Victor Kane. But he knew this: he couldn't let these children face the storm alone. Not anymore. And for the first time in years, Ethan Walker let himself believe that maybe he wasn't finished yet. The storm had quieted, at least for now. But the silence it left behind pressed heavy against the cabin walls. It was the kind of silence that didn't soothe, it waited. Ethan knew that kind well. It was the silence before someone spoke the truth they'd been carrying alone for too long. Hannah sat curled near the hearth, Noah swaddled tight against her chest. The fire painted her face in strokes of amber and shadow, making her look older than 10, as if the years had been carved into her skin too soon. Dane lay beside her, his head resting against her knee, the steady weight of him, anchoring her in place. She hadn't pushed him away, not once since he'd settled there. Ethan sat across from her elbows, braced on his knees, his hands clasped together so tight his knuckles whitened. He didn't press her. He knew better. Children with eyes like hers, haunted, watchful, only spoke when the dam finally cracked. All he could do was sit still, listen, and be ready for whatever came out. It started as a whisper barely carried over the pop of the firewood. He throws things. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just let the words hang like fragile glass suspended between them. Hannah's gaze stayed on the flames, her voice flat and quiet, as if she were reporting the weather instead of tearing open wounds. Sometimes bottles. Sometimes chairs. Once a lamp. It broke. She had cuts on her arm. Her small hand drifted toward her own sleeve as if tracing phantom scars that weren't hers. Ethan's jaw clenched. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he kept his face calm. If she saw anger, she might think it was for her. And God help him, it wasn't. "Did he hurt you too?" Ethan asked gently. His tone careful, steady as a hand on ice. She shook her head once. "Not like Mama." Her breath hitched, her lips trembling. "He said if I cried, he'd give me a reason to." The words were too big for such a small mouth. Ethan's gut twisted. She swallowed, eyes still locked on the fire. That night he was yelling. Noah started crying and Mama held him tighter. She kept saying, "Shh, baby. Shh, it's okay." But he got mad. He grabbed the chair. Her voice grew smaller. I thought he was going to hit Noah." Her words faded, replaced by silence so thick, Ethan could almost hear the echoes of that night inside his own chest. And then, like the air had been waiting, the memory broke through, not his own, but hers. The flames flickered and the cabin shifted. In his mind, Ethan saw it play out as clearly as if it were happening before him. The kitchen. Dim light, a bottle smashed against the wall, the shards glittering like ice on the floor. Hannah crouched near the corner, arms wrapped around her knees. Her mother, Callie, stood in the center, clutching Noah to her chest. The infant's cries rose sharp, cutting through the drunken roar of the man looming over them. Victor Kane's shadow stretched long across the linoleum, his face twisted, veins bulging in his neck. He lifted the chairwood, scraping the floor, his voice slurring with rage. "You shut that kid up, Callie. You shut him up now, or I swear." Callie's arms tightened around the newborn, her back straight despite the fear flashing in her eyes. "He's a baby, Victor. He's just a baby." The chair cracked against the table, splinters flying. Hannah flinched, a small sound escaping her throat. Victor turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "Don't you start, girl. You make one sound and I'll..." Callie's voice cut sharp, desperate. "Leave her alone." She stepped forward, putting her body between him and Hannah, even as Noah's cries shook her arms. The vision faded, the crack of wood replaced by the low pop of the cabin fire. Hannah's shoulders trembled now, her breath shallow, her voice a whisper. He threw it so close, it hit the wall. Mama didn't move. She just kept holding Noah even though she was bleeding. Ethan felt something break inside him. Something he hadn't let himself touch in years. He could see it, Callie's defiance, Hannah's fear, Noah's cries. It all crashed against the memory of another voice, smaller, sweeter one, that no longer existed outside his mind. Maisie, his daughter's laugh, the way she hummed to herself in the back seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit as the snow fell outside the window. He'd only looked away for a second. The road had been slick. The car had spun. And in a blink, she was gone. He swallowed hard, forcing the memory back, locking it behind the wall he'd built. But Hannah's eyes, green-wide, pleading, punched through every barrier he had left. He leaned forward, his voice rougher now, though still steady. "You did the right thing, Hannah. Running, taking Noah. You saved him." Her gaze darted to his, searching, desperate for an anchor. "But I left her." Ethan shook his head, his voice firm, certain. "No. She gave you a chance. She knew what she was doing. That was her strength, not your failure." Hannah's lip trembled. A tear slid down her cheek, leaving a clean trail through the soot and frost. Dane shifted closer, resting his muzzle on her lap. She curled her fingers into his fur, clinging like it was the only thing keeping her steady. She said, "Don't come back. Just find someone good." Ethan's chest burned. He looked at the girl, at the baby tucked against her, at the dog who had already claimed them. And in that moment, the decision wasn't a choice. It was a truth fierce and undeniable. He wasn't going to let Hannah lose her mother, not like he had lost Maisie, not while he still had breath in his body. The fire popped again, louder this time, like a vow sealed in the heat. Ethan sat up straighter, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Hannah," he said softly, but with steel beneath the words, "I promise you this. We're not done. You and Noah, you won't have to face him alone. And your mama, we'll get her back." Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope trembling against the fear. She searched his face as if trying to believe him, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Outside, the storm whispered against the windows, easing as though the mountain itself was listening. And deep inside, Ethan Walker, broken soldier, grieving father, reluctant recluse, felt the first spark of purpose he thought he'd lost forever. He would not fail them, not again, not ever. The fire had burned low, casting the cabin in amber shadows that swayed across the wooden beams. The storm outside had slowed to a steady whisper, but Ethan knew better than to trust the quiet. Mountains had a way of deceiving men, making them believe they were safe just before the ground fell out beneath them. He sat at the table, a spread of supplies laid out before him. The old lantern flickered against steel and paper, a pistol worn but reliable, its magazine fully loaded. A hunting knife with a leather-wrapped handle that had seen wars and wilderness alike. A folded map of the Sierra Nevada, its edges frayed, marked with trails few outsiders knew. Beside it lay a compass and a battered field radio, one of the few pieces of tech he trusted not to betray him. Dane sat nearby, posture erect, ears twitching at every sound. His amber eyes followed Ethan's every movement, unblinking, steady, patient. The dog had been trained to wait for the smallest signal. Tonight, though, his body seemed to hum with anticipation, as if he already knew what was coming. On the hearthrug, Hannah sat with Noah in her arms. The baby had finally fallen asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling beneath the patchwork of blankets Martha had left behind months ago. But Hannah's eyes weren't soft with sleep like her brother's. They burned with something older, something that had no place in a 10-year-old's face, resolve, sharpened by fear. She watched Ethan sort through the supplies. Every scrape of metal, every shuffle of paper made her pulse quicken. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're going after her." It wasn't a question. Ethan glanced up his hand, pausing over the map. "Yes." Hannah tightened her grip on Noah as though the baby might slip away at the sound of the word. "I want to come." Her voice wavered, but the determination behind it was fierce. Ethan's chest tightened. He had expected this. The fire in her had been there since the moment she whispered her mother's name through cracked lips. Still hearing it tore at him. He shook his head slowly. "No, Hannah. Not this time." Her eyes widened. "But she's my mama. I can help. I know the house. I know where he keeps Hannah." His voice was firm but not harsh. He leaned forward, lowering himself so their eyes met on level ground. "You've already done more than most grown men could have. You got Noah out. You kept him alive in a storm that would have killed anyone else. That was brave. But what comes next? It's not for you." Tears pooled in her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. "What if you don't find her?" "I will." "How do you know?" "Because I have to." The words came out rough, heavier than he intended. But they were the truth. He could not, would not fail her. Not again. Hannah bit her lip, her voice breaking. "She told me to run. She told me not to look back. What if she didn't make it?" Ethan reached across the table, resting his calloused hand over her small one. Her fingers were cold, trembling. He tightened his grip just enough to steady her. "Your mother's alive," he said, conviction anchoring each word. "I don't care how broken she is. I'll bring her back to you. That's a promise." Her chin quivered. For a moment she looked younger, like the child she was, instead of the survivor she'd been forced to become. She clutched Noah closer, pressing her cheek against his head, eyes closing tight. Dane shifted, rising to his paws. He padded toward the door and sat squarely before it, gaze fixed outward, posture alert. It was as if he understood the weight of the moment, as if the burden of the night ahead rested on his shoulders too. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. Beyond the window, the forest loomed dark and endless. Somewhere out there, Victor Kane was waiting or watching. And Callie was still in that hell he'd left her in. Ethan stood, sliding the pistol into its holster at his side, the knife into the sheath on his belt. He folded the map carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, the old rhythm of a soldier slipping back into a war he never thought he'd fight again. He turned to Hannah. She sat stiff, her eyes swollen but unblinking, watching his every move. "You'll stay here," he said quietly. "Keep the fire going. Feed Noah when he wakes. Don't open the door unless it's me or someone you trust." Her lips pressed tight. "I can help. You already have." She looked down, her breath shuddering. Ethan crouched before her, his eyes steady on hers. "You want to help me? Then be the reason she has something to come back to. Take care of your brother. Stay strong, Hannah. That's how you fight right now." Her throat worked as she swallowed back the tears. Slowly she nodded. Dane shifted again, tail flicking once against the wooden floor, a silent signal that time was running out. Ethan stood, pulling on his heavy coat. At the door, he paused, his hand on the worn brass knob. The firelight threw his shadow long across the floor, stretching until it touched the girl and her brother. He glanced back one last time. Hannah's eyes were locked on him, wide and desperate, as if memorizing every line of his face. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried through the cabin like a vow carved into stone. "We don't get to fail. Not tonight." Dane's ears flicked. His amber gaze met Ethan's, unwavering. "Ready?" Ethan pulled the door open. The wind surged in, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint lingering echo of danger. He stepped into the night, Dane close beside him, their silhouettes swallowed by the dark as the door shut behind them. Inside, Hannah pressed her face into Noah's blanket, whispering through her tears, "Please bring her back." The storm outside had softened, but in Ethan's chest, the battle had already begun. And as Dane padded silently through the snow, his breath steaming in the cold, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not just a rescue, it was redemption. The night had teeth. The Sierra Nevada lay drowned in shadow, the snow underfoot crunching with a sound that seemed louder than gunfire to Ethan's ears. Every step was deliberate, each breath held as though the air itself might betray him. Beside him, Dane moved like liquid shadow, his paws silent on the frozen crust of snow. The dog's ears were pricked forward, amber eyes glowing faintly under the moonlight's dim grace. Ethan raised a hand. Instantly, Dane froze, muscles taut, breath misting in the cold. Ahead, the faint outline of a cabin emerged between the trees. Its roof sagged beneath the weight of winter smoke long dead in the chimney. The place was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that whispered danger, that wrapped itself around the spine and refused to let go. He crouched low behind a fallen pine, his eyes scanning the yard. Snow had drifted against the porch steps, untouched except for the faint scuff of boots leading to the door. A lantern flickered faintly inside, spilling pale, weak light through a torn curtain. Dane shifted, nose lifting, and gave a low growl, more vibration than sound. Ethan followed the line of his gaze. There, half hidden by the shadows of the porch, a man stood, the dull gleam of metal in his hand. A rifle. The guard leaned against the railing, stamping his boots, shoulders hunched against the cold. Ethan's jaw tightened. He slid his knife free from the sheath at his belt, the blade catching a whisper of moonlight. Guns were loud. Tonight's silence was survival. "Stay," he whispered so softly it could have been mistaken for the wind. Dane obeyed instantly, crouching low, every line of his body strung tight like a bow. Ethan circled wide boots, barely brushing the snow. His breath shallow, measured. Each step was a prayer. He closed the distance, his pulse loud in his ears, until the guard's shadow loomed before him. The man shifted, lifting the rifle eyes, scanning the tree line. Too late. Ethan struck fast, his hand clamping over the man's mouth as the knife flashed once, sharp and precise. Not lethal, just deep enough into the shoulder to drop the weapon from his grasp. The man grunted, muffled by Ethan's grip, but Ethan slammed him hard against the porch railing, the wood groaning under the weight. "Quiet," Ethan hissed, voice low, lethal. The man's eyes rolled, wild panic flashing. Ethan pressed the knife edge just close enough to the man's throat to make him understand. "Where is she?" The guard tried to twist away. Ethan's hand pressed tighter against his mouth. Dane moved closer now, silent, a predator waiting for command. His teeth glinted in the dark, a quiet warning. The man froze, eyes darting to the dog. Ethan leaned closer, his breath hot against the guard's ear. Inside, a frantic nod. Ethan yanked him down to the snow, binding his wrists with a length of cord he'd tucked in his pocket. He left him face down in the drift breath, steaming against the ice. Dane padded forward, sniffed the man once, then looked up at Ethan, waiting. "Good boy," Ethan whispered. He straightened, knife sliding back into its sheath, and reached for the pistol at his side. They moved to the door. The knob was cold beneath his glove. He tested it, unlocked. Too easy. Ethan's gut tightened. He looked down at Dane. The dog's ears twitched, body quivering with restrained energy. Ethan eased the door open. The hinges creaked faintly, but the wind outside masked the sound. He slipped inside, pistol raised, eyes sweeping the room. The stench hit first mildew sweat, the acrid tang of blood. The single lantern burned weak on a table littered with empty bottles and cigarette butts. A chair lay splintered in the corner, as though thrown against the wall. And then he saw her. Callie. She lay on the floor near the bed, wrists bound with a belt looped through the frame. Her hair was matted, her lips split, her skin pale against the dim glow. She stirred faintly at the sound of the door, eyelids fluttering, a faint whimper escaping her throat. Ethan's chest clenched. He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her. Callie. Her eyes opened, dull with pain, but when they focused on him, something sparked a flicker of recognition, or maybe hope. "Ethan." Her voice was raw, a whisper dragged across broken glass. "It's me," he said, cutting through the belt with the knife. The leather snapped under the blade, falling away. He caught her, gently lowering her against his chest. "You're safe now. Hannah and Noah, they're alive. With me." At that, tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her bruised cheeks. Her lips trembled. "They made it. They made it," he assured her, his voice steady, even as emotion threatened to break him. "Your girl." She kept her promise. She ran. She saved him. A sob shuddered through her, weak but fierce. She clutched at his sleeve, fingers trembling. "I thought," "No," Ethan said firmly. "You don't get to give up. Not tonight." Behind him, Dane stood guard at the door, muscles taut, ears flicking at every creak of the old house. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, warning protective. Ethan glanced toward the window. The storm outside masked most sounds, but somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked. He stiffened. They weren't alone. "Can you walk?" he asked her softly. Her lips parted, but her body sagged, the effort too much. Ethan adjusted his grip, sliding one arm beneath her knees, the other cradling her back. He lifted her, as though she weighed nothing. "You don't have to," he murmured. "I've got you." She rested her head against his chest, eyes fluttering shut, but a faint smile ghosted across her lips. "Tell her." "I never stopped singing to him. You can tell her yourself." Ethan whispered, his throat tight. A sudden noise snapped through the silence, a door at the far end of the hall banging shut. Ethan's body tensed. Dane's growl deepened low and lethal. "Victor Kane." Ethan's grip tightened on Callie. He adjusted the pistol in his free hand, his body angled toward the hall. He couldn't risk a firefight with her in his arms, not yet. "Time to go," he muttered. Dane moved, first silent as a shadow slipping through the door and scanning the yard. Ethan followed, boots crunching against the snow as he carried Callie down the steps. The night closed in around them, the storm's breath sharp against his face. Behind him, the house groaned alive with the threat of footsteps. But for one brief, fragile moment, Ethan didn't hear the danger. He heard only Callie's soft whisper against his chest. A mother's relief tangled in exhaustion. "Hannah," and the image seared into his mind, the look he knew would pass between mother and daughter when they finally saw each other again. A look worth every risk, every scar. He tightened his hold on her eyes, burning with a vow that had carried him through every step of this night. "I'll get you back to her," he said, voice fierce and steady, "even if it's the last thing I do." And as Dane's growl cut through the dark again, sharper this time, Ethan knew the battle wasn't over. It was only beginning. The first warning was the sound of boots crunching on the snow. Not Ethan's, not Dane's. Too heavy, too careless to belong to anyone hunting quietly. Ethan froze mid-step, Callie cradled against his chest, and shot a glance at Dane. The dog's body had gone rigid, ears, pinned back lips curling in a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the cold air. Then came the voice. A voice Ethan had heard described by Hannah through her tears, low and venomous. "Going somewhere, Walker." Victor Kane. The night seemed to fold inward on itself. From the tree line, figures emerged, 3 of them, their silhouettes jagged against the faint glow of the lantern still burning in the house. One carried a shotgun. Another had a crowbar slung over his shoulder. And in the center, broad-shouldered eyes burning under the brim of his cap, was Victor. Callie stirred weakly in Ethan's arms, her head lifting just enough for her eyes to find the man in the clearing. The sound that left her throat was a broken whimper. "No." Victor smiled, thin, cruel. "There's my girl." Ethan's grip tightened around her. "Stay quiet," he whispered against her hair, then shifted his stance, planting his boots firm in the snow. His pistol was already raised. Victor spread his hands mockingly. "A hero walks into my house, steals my woman, and thinks he's going to just walk away. Brave. Stupid, but brave. You lost the right to call her yours the moment you laid a hand on her." Ethan shot back, voice steady, cold. Victor's smirk faltered, the faintest flicker of something ugly twisting his face. He stepped closer. The two men flanking him followed, weapons glinting under the moonlight. Ethan shifted Callie slightly, pressing her closer to his chest. She was trembling, too weak to stand. The weight of protecting her pressed on him like iron, but his eyes didn't waver. "Turn around, Kane. Walk away. Tonight doesn't have to end with blood." Victor chuckled low and humorless. "You think you're the first soldier who tried to play savior out here? I bury men like you." He jerked his chin at the man with the shotgun. "Take him." The world erupted. The blast of the shotgun shattered the night, the roar echoing off the frozen pines. Snow burst up from the ground where the shot struck inches from Ethan's boots. He twisted, dropping low, his pistol spitting fire in answer. The man with the crowbar lunged forward, screaming, but Ethan's shot dropped him into the snow. His cry cut off mid-breath. "Move!" Ethan barked, shoving himself backward toward the trees. Callie clutched tight. Dane exploded forward like a streak of shadow, a snarl ripping from his chest. He collided with the shotgun wielder before the man could pump another round. The force sent them both crashing into the snow, Dane's teeth flashing white as they sank into the man's arm. The shotgun fired wild into the air. Victor roared, raising his own pistol. "You son of a..." Ethan barely had time to react. He pivoted, shielding Callie with his body, and fired. The bullet grazed Victor's arm, jerking him back a step. Rage flared across Victor's face, his breath curling smoke into the frigid air. "Run!" Ethan shouted down at Dane. But Dane wasn't running. He was fighting like a creature possessed, his body a wall between his master and the danger. Blood sprayed across the snow as the shotgun man howled, trying to wrench free. Dane clamped harder, unrelenting. Another shot cracked. Ethan spun, heart-dropping. Victor's gun smoked in his hand, and Dane staggered. The bullet had torn into his flank, red blooming across his black fur like spilled paint on fresh snow. No, Ethan's voice ripped from his throat, raw and desperate. Dane didn't fall. Not yet. He released the man he'd taken down and turned back to Victor. Lips peeled back, eyes blazing with a fury Ethan had never seen before. He lunged again, body slamming into Victor, just as the man raised his pistol for another shot. The two crashed into the snow, Victor cursing as the dog's weight bore him down. "Ethan, go." The word wasn't spoken, but Ethan swore he heard it in the way Dane fought, and the sound of his growl and the defiance etched into every drop of blood hitting the snow. Ethan tore his eyes away, swallowing the surge of grief that threatened to paralyze him. He shifted Callie higher in his arms and bolted for the trees. Her weak voice brushed his ear. "Dane? He's buying us time," Ethan said through clenched teeth. "Hold on." Bullets cut through the night behind him, splintering bark spraying snow. He zigzagged through the trees, lungs burning, every muscle screaming. The storm whipped against him, the cold slicing like knives, but he didn't slow. Not while her heartbeat still fluttered against his chest. Behind him, the sounds of the fight raged. Dane's snarl, Victor's curses, the crash of bodies in the snow, then another shot, louder, final. The world seemed to pause. Ethan's chest seized. He almost turned back. Almost. But Callie's faint breath against his collar snapped him forward again. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not when two children were waiting in the safety of the cabin, believing him when he'd promised to bring their mother back. The trees thickened, swallowing them in shadow. Ethan forced his legs to keep moving, each step a battle against the weight of what he'd left behind. At last, the faint outline of his cabin broke through the dark. Its windows glowed faintly with firelight. Safety. Hope. But the victory tasted hollow. Because behind them, somewhere in the snow, Dane had fallen. Ethan staggered onto the porch, boots slipping on the ice. The door flew open before he reached it. Hannah stood there, her eyes wide, her face pale. "Mom." Callie stirred weakly in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. A faint smile ghosted her lips. "Hannah?" The girl's sob cracked the air as Ethan carried her mother inside. He laid Callie gently by the fire, Hannah falling to her knees beside her, clutching her hand. Noah's faint cry broke from the basket, filling the room with fragile life. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, staring at them, mother, daughter, son, safe together. And yet, the door creaked behind him. Ethan turned sharply, pistol raised, but there was no threat. Only silence. Only the empty dark. His hand trembled as he lowered the weapon. The sound of Dane's growl still echoed in his ears. The image of his leap burned into his vision. He pressed a hand against the doorframe, bowing his head. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "You kept us safe." And outside, the snow fell harder, covering the ground where Dane had last stood, as though the night itself couldn't bear to leave his sacrifice uncovered. The storm didn't wait for them. It came crashing back with a vengeance, as though the mountain itself had conspired to swallow every breath, every scream, every trace of what had happened in the clearing. The wind tore through the trees in sharp, ragged howls, and the snow fell so thick it seemed to erase the world, one flake at a time. Ethan's boots sank deep into the drifts with every step. Callie's weight pressed against him, her body limp, trembling with exhaustion, each breath shallow. He tightened his grip around her waist, forcing his muscles to ignore the fire screaming through them. "Stay with me, Callie," he muttered, voice harsh from the cold. "You're almost home." Behind him, a sound cut through the storm, the shuffle of paws dragging through the snow. Ethan whipped his head around, heart hammering. Through the white haze, he saw Dane. The dog was limping, each step heavy, his black fur streaked with crimson. Blood poured down his flank, staining the snow beneath him. Yet his eyes, burning amber, even against the storm's fury, never wavered from Ethan's back. He was following, refusing to be left behind. "Dane!" Ethan's throat constricted. He wanted to stop, to lift him, to carry him, but Callie needed him upright, moving. The cabin was still half a mile away, maybe more in this weather. Time wasn't a luxury. "Come on, boy," he called, voice breaking as he pushed forward. "Just a little more." A crack split the storm, not thunder, gunfire. The bullet smacked into the tree to Ethan's left, splintering bark inches from his head. He dropped low, instinct honed from years of combat snapping into place. The storm swallowed everything, but not the voice that followed. Walker Victor's voice was raw, furious, carried on the wind. "You can't hide. She's mine," Callie whimpered, clutching weakly at Ethan's coat. He bent his head, pressing his cheek against her icy hair. "He's not taking you again," he swore. His words were low, but the promise in them cut through the roar of the storm. Another gunshot. The snow beside them burst into a spray of white dust. Dane barked a sharp, defiant sound that seemed to tear straight through the night. He staggered ahead, positioning himself between Ethan and the unseen threat, his body a shield, though it trembled under the weight of blood loss. "Damn it, Dane." "Stay with me," Ethan hissed. He veered sharply, cutting toward the thicker pines where the trees formed a jagged canopy shielding them from the worst of the storm. The world narrowed into a tunnel of white and shadow. Every sound was muffled by the snow, except Victor's voice, closer now, chasing them like a curse. "You think you can take her from me? You think you can steal what's mine and live?" Ethan gritted his teeth, pushing harder, dragging Callie over a fallen log. She gasped in pain, her body jarring against his chest, but she didn't protest. Somewhere inside, she knew silence was survival. Dane stumbled as he vaulted the log, his legs buckling. For a moment, Ethan thought he wouldn't rise, but the dog forced himself up, blood staining his paws, and pressed on. The storm thickened. Snow whipped sideways, blinding. Ethan's lungs burned with every breath of frigid air. His vision blurred not from the cold, but from the memory of another night, another storm. The night he'd lost his daughter. He shook it off, forcing himself back to the present. Not again. Not tonight. The faint glow of the cabin flickered through the trees ahead. Relief hit him like a blow, sharp and painful. "Almost there," he rasped. His voice was barely audible above the storm, but Callie stirred her lips, forming a whisper. "Hannah." "She's waiting," Ethan said. "You'll see her soon." But the storm wasn't letting them go without a fight. Another shot cracked through the night. This one closer. Too close. Ethan ducked instinctively, twisting his body to shield Callie. He felt the sting of bark tearing into his cheek as the bullet ripped past the trunk beside him. Dane growled, spinning toward the sound. Ethan saw the flash of Victor's coat through the trees, the glint of metal in his hand. Their eyes met for a split second across the distance, hatred burning like a brand. Ethan fired. The shot disappeared into the storm, no cry to confirm if it struck. Victor's laugh came instead, low and mocking. "You can't outrun me, soldier." Ethan clenched his jaw and pushed harder. His boots slipping on ice, his breath coming ragged. Dane stayed close, though each step left a smear of red in the snow. Finally, the cabin's porch loomed before them, its lantern swinging wildly in the storm. The door burst open. Hannah stood in the frame, eyes wide, hair whipping around her face. "Mom." Her scream cracked the air. She bolted down the steps before Ethan could stop her. "No, stay back," Ethan barked, but it was too late. She was already running toward him, tears streaming down her face. Callie's head lifted weakly. Her eyes found her daughter. A faint, broken smile curved her lips. "Hannah." Ethan stumbled onto the porch, collapsing to his knees as Hannah threw herself against her mother. Callie's arms weak as they were wrapped around her daughter, holding her close. Hannah sobbed into her chest, the sound raw and shattering, echoing louder than the storm outside. Noah's cry rose from inside the cabin, high-pitched and desperate, as though even he could sense the gravity of the moment. Martha, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, tireless, swooped in, lifting the baby and bringing him close to Callie. She pressed him gently into her arms. Callie kissed his forehead, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. "My babies." Ethan's chest heaved. He couldn't tear his eyes away from them, from the way the three clung together, fragile but unbroken. Behind them, Dane staggered onto the porch, his paws slipping on the icy boards. His chest rose and fell with labored breaths, blood soaking his fur. He collapsed against the doorframe, but even as his body trembled, his eyes stayed fixed on the tree-line, ears pricked for danger. Ethan dropped beside him, pressing a hand gently to his wound. "Stay with me, boy. Please. Just a little longer." Victor's voice carried faintly through the storm, distant now, but still a threat. "You can't hide forever." Ethan's eyes hardened. He looked back at Callie and Hannah, then down at Dane, whose gaze never wavered from the woods. The storm was still raging, but inside the cabin, for the first time in years, there was warmth. And Ethan knew, no matter what it cost, he would not let Victor take it away. The storm had finally eased, but inside the cabin the silence was sharper than the wind outside. The flickering fire cast unsteady shadows across the wooden walls, painting the room with an anxious glow. Every crackle of burning pine sounded like a clock ticking too fast. Every breath that came from Dane's chest, too shallow, too fragile. Hannah sat on the floor beside him. Her knees pulled tight against her chest. Her small hands trembled as they pressed into the thick fur of his neck. Fingers gripping as if she could anchor him here in this moment, with her will alone. Her tears soaked into his coat, warm against the cold dampness of his blood. "Please don't leave me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You promised. You can't leave yet." Dane's ear twitched, faintly responding even through the fog of pain. His golden eyes flicked up toward her, weak, but still holding the steady calm of a guardian who hadn't once faltered. It broke Ethan's chest to watch. He crouched on the other side of the dog, his calloused hand pressing gently over the wound along Dane's ribcage. Blood seeped between his fingers, sticky and relentless. He'd seen this kind of injury before, too many times. Too many good men and loyal partners bleeding out in his arms. He swallowed hard, forcing the memory back down into the dark place where he kept it buried. This wasn't the time. Ethan reached for the radio lying on the small table. His hands shook, though he forced them steady. He clicked the button, voice low, urgent. "Base, this is Walker. Emergency. I need medical evac, immediate. Coordinates." He rattled them off, repeating twice. Static spat back at him, a cruel hiss that drowned his hope. "Base, do you copy?" He tried again, louder, his voice slicing through the fragile quiet of the cabin. More static. He slammed the radio down, jaw tightening. The storm had done what Victor couldn't. It had cut them off. From the corner, Callie sobbed softly. Her body curled on the worn sofa with Noah against her chest. The baby stirred his small whimpers, adding a fragile thread of life to the heavy air. Callie's eyes, bruised and red-rimmed, lifted toward Ethan. "If it weren't for you, my children, they wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here." Her voice cracked, trembling with both gratitude and grief. "How do I ever thank you?" Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her she didn't owe him anything, that he'd only done what anyone should. But he knew the truth. Most people wouldn't have risked it. Most people would have turned away, let the storm and the monsters within it swallow the Miller family whole. He only said, "Just hold them. That's thanks enough." Callie's tears fell harder. She bent to kiss Noah's forehead, rocking him gently while watching Hannah at Dane's side. "He saved them too," she whispered, her gaze flicking to the dog. Hannah's small fingers brushed through Dane's fur, careful to avoid the wound. Her lips moved in silent prayer before her voice broke through, trembling and raw. "Dane, don't go. I need you. Please, don't leave me like Daddy did. Don't leave me like..." Her voice caught, like Mommy almost did. Ethan closed his eyes, the words carving deep into him. He could hear the echo of his daughter's voice years ago, whispering something not so different as she clung to him in a hospital bed. He opened his eyes quickly, swallowing the ache that rose in his throat. He couldn't break now. Not in front of Hannah. "Look at me, kiddo," Ethan said gently, shifting closer. Hannah turned her tear-streaked face toward him, eyes wide with fear. "Dane's a fighter. He's not giving up easy. You hear me? He's still here because he doesn't want you to be alone. So we don't give up either." She nodded, sniffling, though her grip on Dane only tightened. "Promise?" "I promise," Ethan said, though the word burned. He couldn't promise life where he wasn't sure it could be saved. But Hannah needed hope more than truth right now. Dane let out a faint huff, his body shivering under the blanket Ethan had pulled over him. Hannah leaned closer, pressing her cheek against his neck. "See, he heard you. He knows." Ethan adjusted the blanket, checking the wound again, and forced his mind to keep working. They needed to stop the bleeding. He reached into his field kit, pulling out bandages, his fingers moving with steady precision, despite the storm raging inside him. He pressed a clean wrap over the wound, Dane flinching slightly, but staying still, his trust complete. "Good boy," Ethan murmured, his voice breaking for the first time that night. He pressed harder, whispering words meant more for himself than for the dog. "You hold on. You don't quit on me now." The firelight flickered across Hannah's face as she whispered again, her words threading through the room like a fragile hymn. "Dane, don't leave me. You're my hero." Callie's sobs deepened, muffled against Noah's tiny body. Ethan looked up at her, and their eyes met. Hers carried the same silent plea he felt pounding in his chest. Save him. Somehow. The radio crackled suddenly. Static shifted, and for a heartbeat, a voice broke through. "Walker? Copy?" Ethan's hand snapped out, grabbing the device. "Base, I hear you. We need a medevac. Immediate injured K9. Critical blood loss, plus civilians in danger. Repeat urgent." The voice faded, static, swallowing it again. "Base, say again," Ethan shouted into the receiver, but the silence returned. Hannah looked up, eyes wide with hope. "They heard you," maybe Ethan said, though his gut told him not to count on it. He didn't add that the storm could choke the signal again before anyone found them. Instead, he reached across and brushed a tear from Hannah's cheek with a gloved thumb. "We'll keep trying." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm still roared, but in the small cabin, the world had narrowed to the fragile rhythm of Dane's breathing, the quiet whimpers of a newborn, and the desperate prayers of a little girl clutching the only friend who had never once let her down. And as Ethan sat there, one hand steadying the bandage against Dane's wound, and the other clenched around the useless radio, he made another vow, silent but ironclad. If the storm, the mountain, and even death itself wanted to take Dane tonight, they would have to go through him first. The wind outside had become a scream, battering the cabin walls, as if the storm itself wanted to break in. Ethan stood near the door, rifle steady in his hands, every nerve in his body wired tight. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that crawled up the wooden walls. Hannah crouched near the hearth, with Noah bundled tightly in blankets, her small hand gripping the bright red whistle her mother had pressed into her palm weeks ago. She didn't take her eyes off Ethan, her face pale but determined. And then it came. The crunch of boots in the snow, slow, deliberate. Not the random moan of the wind, not an animal brushing against the cabin. A man's steps, heavy, confident. Ethan's chest tightened. Victor Kane had found them. The doorknob rattled once, then again, harder. A pause. Then a low laugh slid through the cracks, cruel and familiar. "Ethan Walker?" The voice drawled, oily as poison. "So this is where the hero plays house?" Hannah's breath caught. She shrank closer to the wall, clutching Noah, as if her tiny arms could make him invisible. Dane, lying near the door, lifted his head. His body was weak bandages, dark with blood, but his teeth bared in a growl that vibrated deep in his chest. Ethan raised his voice, calm and steady despite the storm inside him. "Walk away, Victor. This ends tonight." The door creaked open slowly, the storm spilling in around the silhouette of a tall man. Victor stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat as though he owned the place. His eyes, cold and glittering, scanned the room until they landed on Hannah. He smiled, the kind of smile that turned blood cold. "There's my little girl," he said softly, as though his words could erase years of cruelty. "You shouldn't have run. You made me chase you." Hannah pressed the whistle tighter against her lips, her chest rising in quick, frightened breaths. She didn't blow it yet. She waited for Ethan's cue. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. "One more step, Victor. You'll regret it." Victor's gaze flicked to the rifle, then back to Ethan's face. His smirk never faltered. You think you can keep them from me, You couldn't even save your own family. You'll fail them too. The words hit like a strike to Ethan's chest. Memories surged the lifeless weight of his daughter in his arms, the hollow ache that had never left. But he didn't let the pain show. Not now. He steadied his aim jaw tight. Try me, he said. Victor spread his arms slightly as if mocking surrender. You're a soldier without a war walker. A broken man clinging to ghosts. These kids, they're mine. That woman, mine. And nothing you do will change that. Wrong. Ethan said, his voice like steel. They don't belong to you. Not anymore. Victor's smile sharpened. We'll see. Then he lunged. The room erupted. Ethan fired the shot, cracking through the cabin as Victor dove to the side, the bullet tearing into the wall. Hannah gasped, clutching Noah tight. Dane, despite his injuries, surged forward with a feral snarl, teeth snapping inches from Victor's arm. The criminal swung a boot, striking Dane hard, but the dog held his ground, growling with a fury that shook the walls. Blow it, Hannah, Ethan shouted. The whistle pierced the storm, a shrill, desperate cry cutting through the chaos. Victor cursed, grabbing for Ethan's rifle. The two men collided, crashing against the table. The lamp toppled, shattering firelight, flaring dangerously. Ethan's muscles burned as he fought the old instincts of combat roaring back. Victor's fist connected with Ethan's jaw, snapping his head back. Pain flashed white, but Ethan countered, driving his elbow into Victor's ribs. The man grunted, staggering, but his hand shot out, seizing Hannah's arm. She screamed, twisting, trying to pull away. Let her go, Ethan roared, tackling him. They went down hard, the rifle skidding across the floor. Dane lunged, teeth sinking into Victor's coat sleeve, dragging him back. Victor howled, wrenching free just as the cabin door burst open. Sheriff's office. Drop it. Clay the sheriff stormed inside, gun drawn, his deputy right behind him. The beam of a flashlight cut through the chaos, landing squarely on Victor. Victor froze, chest-heaving eyes darting between Ethan the sheriff and the girl still clutching the whistle. Clay's voice was iron. It's over, Kane. Don't make me put you down. For a heartbeat, Victor seemed to weigh his chances. Then with a snarl, he lunged again, straight for Hannah. Dane moved first. With a growl that came from the depths of his soul, the battered dog launched forward, slamming into Victor's chest. The impact sent the man crashing back against the wall. Victor's knife clattered to the floor, sliding out of reach. Ethan was on him in an instant, pinning him down, rage burning in his eyes. You're done, Kane, he spat. Clay stepped in cuffs, snapping tight around Victor's wrists as the man cursed and fought spitting venom, even as he was dragged to his feet. You'll regret this, Walker. Victor snarled, his voice a venomous promise. You think this is the end? Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and deadly calm. For you? Yeah, it is. The sheriff shoved Victor toward the door, his deputy hauling him into the night. The sound of the storm swallowed his protests until they faded into the distance. Silence fell heavy and broken only by Hannah's sobs. She dropped the whistle, running to Dane, who lay trembling on the floor. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. You did it, she whispered, voice shaking with both relief and sorrow. You saved me. Dane let out a soft whine, his eyes half closed but still burning with loyalty. His tail thumped weakly against the floor just once. Ethan sank to his knees beside them, one hand resting on Dane's head. His throat tightened, but his voice was steady. Good boy. You held the line. Hannah looked up at him, tears streaking her cheeks. He's going to be okay, right? Ethan met her eyes, his own glistening in the dim light. He couldn't promise. But he also couldn't take away the fragile thread of hope she clung to. He's a fighter, Ethan said softly. And tonight, he won. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the cabin, for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of safety. Fragile, trembling, but real. Because even in the darkest night, they had faced the monster, and they had not bowed. The silence that followed Victor's arrest was not the silence of peace. It was heavy, suffocating, the kind that presses down on every chest and lingers in the corners like smoke refusing to clear. The cabin, once a fragile sanctuary against the storm, now felt like a room suspended between two worlds, life and loss. Outside, the snow fell gently, almost mercifully, as if the storm itself had spent its rage and now whispered only apologies. Ethan closed the door with deliberate care, his hand trembling against the latch. He could still feel the echo of Victor's roar in his bones, the sharp snap of the cuffs as Clay had led him away. For a moment, he thought the weight of victory might offer relief, but the sound that followed shattered any illusion of triumph. Hannah's cry. He turned. The girl knelt on this braided rug near the fire, her small hands buried in the thick fur of Dane's chest. The dog lay still. Too still. His breaths shallow, spaced apart by stretches of terrifying quiet. Blood darkened his side, seeping through the cloth Ethan had pressed there earlier, staining the rug beneath him. Hannah's face was wet with tears, her cheeks flushed from sobbing, her entire body shaking as if the earth beneath her had given way. "No," she choked, her voice splintering. "No, you can't. You promised. You promised you'd stay." Ethan's knees gave out beneath him, and he lowered himself beside her, reaching out with hands that shook, despite years of battle-hardened steadiness. "Hannah, don't," she cried, clutching Dane tighter, pressing her face into his fur. "Don't say it. Don't you say it." Ethan's throat constricted. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, that the bleeding could be stopped, that the warmth leaving Dane's body was only temporary. But the truth sat on his tongue like a stone. He had seen this before too many times. The light fading behind eyes that had given everything. The body holding on, not for itself, but for the ones it loved. Callie stood in the doorway, her arm wrapped around her ribs, her eyes swollen from pain and exhaustion. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The sight before her daughter cradling the dog who had thrown himself between them and death, was enough to break whatever strength she had left. Her hand lifted, trembling, covering her mouth as she leaned against the frame, tears streaking silently down her face. Ethan laid a hand gently on Hannah's shoulder. "Sweetheart," he whispered, his voice low and trembling. "He's been fighting for you since the moment he found you. He's tired now. No," Hannah screamed, turning on him, her green eyes blazing with defiance through the tears. "He can't leave, not now. Not when we're safe. He promised me he wouldn't leave." Dane stirred faintly at the sound of her voice, his ears twitching weakly, his amber eyes flickering open. For a brief fleeting moment, he lifted his head enough to nuzzle against Hannah's cheek. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Enough to send fresh sobs tearing through her chest. "You see," she gasped, clutching him. "He's still here. He's still here." Ethan swallowed hard, his own eyes burning. He pressed his palm against Dane's side, feeling the weakening thud of the dog's heart beneath his fingers. "He's here," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "He's here because of you. Because you gave him something to fight for." The fire crackled, throwing long shadows across the wooden walls. Outside, the snow fell softer now, the flakes settling on the window ledges like feathers. The world, for all its cruelty, seemed to pause in reverence. Dane's breathing hitched. Hannah felt it, her hands tightening around him as panic surged. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking into a plea. "Please don't go. Please, Dane, don't leave me. Don't leave us." Her small body trembled with each sob, and Ethan could no longer hold back. He leaned closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, pulling her gently against him while her face stayed pressed to Dane's fur. He felt her tears soak through his shirt, hot and desperate, each one a wound he couldn't heal. Callie finally crossed the room, kneeling slowly, her injuries making every movement a struggle. She placed her hand softly on Hannah's back, her own tears spilling freely now. "Baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He gave us more than we could ever ask. He gave us you. He gave us each other." Hannah shook her head, gasping. "I can't let him go. I can't." Dane's chest rose once more, shallow, and his eyes flickered open again. He looked at Hannah, then at Ethan, as if trying to tell them something without words. Ethan understood. He had seen that look before in comrades who had chosen their final moments not for themselves, but for the ones they loved. "He's telling you it's okay," Ethan said softly, his voice trembling. "He's telling you he did what he was meant to do. And now, he needs you to let him rest." The words tore something open inside Hannah. She shook with the force of her grief, clinging tighter to Dane, whispering over and over, "I love you. I love you. Please don't leave me." Dane's ears twitched one final time. His tail moved faintly, the gentlest thump against the rug. And then with a long, slow exhale, his body stilled. The silence that followed was absolute. No crackle of the fire, no whisper of the wind through the cracks. Just silence, thick and unforgiving. Hannah's cry broke it. A sound so raw, it seemed to tear through the walls of the cabin and into the frozen night beyond. She buried her face against Dane's neck, sobbing until her body shook with the weight of it. Callie folded her arms around her, her own tears falling onto her daughter's hair. Ethan sat close, his head bowed, his hand resting on Dane's still form, his own chest heaving silently as the weight of another loss pressed down. The minutes bled into hours. The fire burned low, its glow dimming. Finally, when Hannah's sobs had softened into trembling breaths, Ethan lifted her gently into his arms. She resisted at first, clutching Dane's fur, but Callie leaned close, whispering, "He's not leaving your heart, baby." Not ever. Hannah's small hand lingered on Dane's side before she finally allowed Ethan to lift her. She buried her face in his shoulder, her body still trembling. Callie followed her steps unsteady until they reached the door. The burial happened the next morning. The snow had softened, blanketing the world in a quiet white that seemed almost sacred. Ethan carried Dane's body in his arms, his strength steady even as his heart broke with each step. Hannah walked beside him, her hand clutching a small wooden plaque she had carved herself during the long night. They reached the base of the tallest pine, the very tree where Hannah had first collapsed in the snow with Noah in her arms. Ethan laid Dane gently onto the earth, his fur bright against the pale white ground. Callie knelt, her hands trembling as she placed a small sprig of lavender on his chest. Hannah stepped forward, tears streaking her face, her lips trembling as she pressed the wooden plaque into the fresh snow at the head of the grave. Carved into it, uneven but bold, were the words, "For Dane, the one who saved us." Her voice broke as she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan lowered his head, closing his eyes as the words settled into the silence. Callie reached for Hannah's hand, squeezing it tightly. Together they stood in the cold, the snow drifting gently around them, as if the world itself was bowing in farewell. When the last handful of snow had been laid over Dane's grave, Hannah knelt one final time, pressing her small palm against the mound. "You'll always be here," she whispered. "Always." And in that moment, though, her heart ached with a pain too big for her years, she believed it. The cabin felt different that evening. The fire burned brighter, almost defiantly, as if refusing to let the darkness win. But the empty space by the hearth was impossible to ignore. Hannah sat close to her mother. Noah nestled in her arms, her eyes red but steady. Ethan sat nearby, his gaze distant, his jaw tight. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Hannah lifted her head, her voice small but certain. "We'll keep his promise," she said. Ethan looked at her, his eyes wet. "What promise, sweetheart?" "That we'll never be afraid again," she said softly. "That we'll always protect each other, like he did." Callie's hand tightened on her daughter's. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a fragile, painful hope blooming where grief had rooted deep. He nodded slowly, his voice rough. "Then we will." The snow outside continued to fall. But inside the cabin, something else had taken root. Loss had carved its mark into them. Yes, but so had love. And love, Ethan thought, was the only thing that could survive storms like this. The Sierra Nevada no longer groaned with winter's fury. Months had passed since the storm that changed everything. And though snow still dusted the mountaintops, the valley below had begun to breathe again. Pine branches swayed gently in the early spring breeze, the sound of birdsong slipping between the trees like fragile threads of hope. Nestled among the evergreens stood the cabin. Once a fortress against the storm, now it looked transformed. A wooden sign hung above the porch, carved carefully by Ethan's steady hands and painted with Hannah's small, determined strokes, "Dane's Haven." The words caught the light of the morning sun, glowing like a promise etched into wood. Beneath the sign, Hannah stood holding her mother's hand, her green eyes brighter now, though still shadowed by memories. Beside them, a boy with wide, curious eyes clutched a tattered backpack. He couldn't have been older than 7. His shoes were worn thin, his coat frayed at the edges. He looked uncertain, the weight of his past too heavy for such small shoulders. "Welcome home," Callie said softly, kneeling so her gaze met his. Her voice, once brittle from years of fear, carried a new gentleness, like a woman who had found a reason to believe in tomorrow again. The boy blinked at her, his lips parting as if he wanted to speak but didn't know how. Hannah smiled, stepping closer, her grip firm on his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." Safe. The word echoed through the clearing like a vow, and for the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to believe it. He stood on the porch, watching the scene unfold, his weathered face softened by a rare expression of peace. The cane resting against his leg wasn't from old age, but from the lingering wound of that night, the one Dane had shielded him from. He'd told Clay afterward that it was a small price to pay, but deep down he knew the true cost had been carried by another. Behind him, the cabin hummed with quiet life. 2 more children sat by the fireplace, inside their laughter, spilling faintly into the air. Callie had been the one to suggest it first. "We can't be the only ones," she'd said weeks after the storm, her hands trembling as she clutched a folded flyer from the sheriff's office. "There are more children like Hannah out there. Children who need somewhere to go. somewhere safe. At first, Ethan had resisted. He had built his life on solitude, on shutting the world out before it could hurt him again. But every night, as he heard Hannah whisper to the empty space by the fire, where Dane used to lay something inside him, shifted. The idea of opening the cabin to others didn't feel like losing Dane. It felt like honoring him, so they did, together. Clay had helped spread the word discreetly, guiding children from homes filled with shadows toward the light of the cabin in the woods. It wasn't official. It wasn't backed by any agency. But it was real. And sometimes real was enough. Now, watching Hannah squeeze the boy's hand, Ethan felt the ache in his chest sharpen, not with grief, but with a fragile, painful kind of pride. Dane wasn't here, not in the way they wanted, but his presence lingered in every corner, in the warmth of the fire, in the soft bark of laughter, in the fearless way Hannah looked at the world, determined never to run again. Callie rose, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Come on," she said, her voice steadier now. "Let's show him inside." Hannah nodded, leading the boy toward the porch. As they passed Ethan, the boy glanced up at him, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Ethan crouched, slowly ignoring the stiffness in his leg, and held out his hand. "You're safe here," he said simply. The boy hesitated, then placed his small hand in Ethan's. It was cold, trembling. Ethan gave it a firm squeeze. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a moment, the boy's eyes shimmered. He didn't cry, not yet. But Ethan saw it, the fragile hope breaking through the walls he had built to survive. Inside the cabin, the warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. The fire crackled brightly, the scent of fresh bread wafting from the small kitchen where Callie had taken to baking every morning. Hannah led the boy toward the hearth, where two other children sat cross-legged, showing each other how to whittle small animals from scraps of wood Ethan had given them. "This is Sam," Hannah announced softly. "He's staying with us now." The other children looked up, their faces breaking into shy smiles. One of them, a girl with dark braids and eyes too old for her age, scooted over to make space. Sam sat hesitantly, glancing around as if expecting the walls to collapse on him at any second. But when Hannah sat beside him close enough that their shoulders touched, he finally exhaled. Callie watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart swelling and aching all at once. She caught Ethan's gaze across the room. For a moment, neither spoke, but the silence between them was no longer the silence of loss. It was the silence of two people who had clawed their way through hell and found against all odds a reason to stay standing. Later that evening, as the children settled onto blankets by the fire, Hannah slipped outside alone. The twilight had painted the snow in shades of blue and silver, the air crisp but gentle now. She walked slowly toward the pine tree where Dane lay, her boots crunching softly in the snow. The wooden plaque stood firm, the words she had carved still bold despite the weather. "For Dane, the one who saved us." She knelt, brushing a thin layer of snow from the top. "We're doing it, Dane," she whispered, her breath clouding in the air. "We're keeping them safe, just like you wanted." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry this time. Instead, she smiled faintly, her hand resting on the mound of earth. "I still miss you every day. But I know you're here, in them, in us." Behind her, Ethan's footsteps approached slowly. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to intrude, but Hannah turned and gave him a small nod. "You can come closer," she said softly. He joined her, his eyes settling on the plaque. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the pine branches whispering overhead. "I used to think loss was the end," Ethan said quietly. "That once you lost something, you were just broken. But watching you, Hannah, watching you fight for hope, even when it hurts, you've shown me I was wrong." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes shining with a wisdom far beyond her 10 years. "We're not broken," she whispered. "We're just different. But we can still be strong." Ethan's chest tightened. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, the words catching in his throat. "You're stronger than I'll ever be." She smiled faintly. "Not without you." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine. And something else, something Ethan swore was the musk of Dane's fur, the warmth of his presence, lingering still. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting it wash over him. When they returned to the cabin, the laughter of children spilled into the cold night air. Callie stood by the fire, her face illuminated by the glow, her eyes soft with a kind of peace Ethan hadn't seen in her since the first time they met. The cabin wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a promise, a vow, a living memorial to the dog who had given his life so that these children could have a chance at theirs. And as Hannah settled beside her mother, pulling Sam close so he wouldn't feel alone, Ethan knew that Dane's spirit hadn't left them. It was here, woven into every smile, every flicker of hope, every promise that no child would ever have to run again. Dane's haven had begun, and with it, so had their healing. The Sierra Nevada had shed the last breath of winter. Sunlight poured through the trees in golden ribbons, brushing against the cabin that now stood proudly at the edge of the clearing. Where snow once pressed heavy upon the roof and wind clawed through every crack, there was warmth. There was life. There was laughter. The children were outside, their voices rising like songbirds spilling across the meadow that stretched from the cabin's porch to the tree line. Their laughter was not the timid kind, not the brittle sound of children who had learned to hide their joy for fear of punishment. It was bright, unguarded, the laughter of hearts beginning to heal. In the middle of the yard stood Hannah Miller. 10 years old, but her small shoulders carried the weight of something far greater. In her hands she held a wooden sign newly carved, though her fingerprints still lingered in the grooves of the letters. She climbed carefully onto the small stool Ethan had set out for her. Her mother Callie held the stool steady, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't try to hide. Ethan stood just a few feet away, his cane tucked under his arm, watching with quiet intensity as Hannah lifted the sign. The words glimmered softly in the spring sun. Here no one has to run anymore. The letters weren't perfect. Some lines curved a little too much, others cut too deep. But to Hannah, they were flawless. She ran her fingers gently across the carved words, whispering them, as though the act itself made the vow real. Then with a small smile that trembled at the corners, she nailed the sign into place above the cabin door. For a long moment, the clearing fell silent. The children, their games paused, gathered close, their eyes wide. They looked at the sign, then at Hannah, as if realizing all at once that the words weren't just letters on wood. They were a promise. Hannah turned her green eyes, finding Ethan. "It's true now," she said softly. Ethan's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but no words came, so he only nodded. Behind them, the meadow stretched out toward the boughs of towering pines, and just beyond, where the earth rose gently toward the tree line. The ground had been softened into a small field of wildflowers. Bluebells and golden daffodils swayed in the light breeze, their petals glowing as though the sun itself had chosen to rest among them. There beneath the strongest pine lay Dane. His resting place was marked not by a grand stone, but by a simple wooden marker Hannah had helped Ethan carve weeks earlier. On it, the words read, "For Dane, the one who saved us." It had been Hannah's idea to plant flowers there. She had gathered seeds from Clay's wife, spending hours each day tending the soil, whispering stories to the earth, as though Dane might hear them. And now the meadow had bloomed an explosion of color against the green, as if the land itself honored him. Ethan's eyes lingered on the field. Every time the wind moved through the flowers, it felt to him like the brush of fur against his hand, the steady presence of a dog who had given his all. Callie touched his arm gently. "He'd be proud," she murmured. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding again. "He already is." The children scattered back into the yard, chasing one another through the sunlight. Their bare feet thudded softly against the earth, laughter tumbling after them like music. Hannah joined them, her braid bouncing as she ran, her voice lifting high as she called for Sam, who had grown bolder in the weeks since his arrival. Sam grinned, dodging around the others, before darting toward the meadow. Hannah followed her laughter, ringing clear, the sound carrying all the way to the porch where Ethan remained. He watched her, and for a moment he saw not just Hannah, but the little girl he had once lost. The ache was still there, sharp and deep, but it no longer hollowed him. Instead, it reminded him that love, even love bound in loss, could build something new. Callie stepped closer, standing beside him. Her eyes were on Hannah, but her hand brushed lightly against his. He didn't pull away. The warmth of her touch felt like sunlight seeping into the cracks of his soul. "She's different now," Callie said quietly. "She's stronger," Ethan replied. His voice was rough but steady. Callie nodded. "Because of you." Ethan shook his head. "Because of him." His gaze flicked toward the meadow where the flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Callie followed his eyes, her throat tightening. For a moment they stood in silence, listening to the laughter of children, the whisper of the pines, the steady heartbeat of a world that had chosen finally to heal. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the clearing in shades of gold and rose, the children gathered on the porch. Callie passed out warm biscuits from the oven, the smell of butter and honey filling the air. Sam sat cross-legged beside Hannah, his cheeks smudged with flour from helping in the kitchen earlier. Ethan sat nearby, his cane resting against the porch rail, a mug of coffee cradled in his hands. He listened to the chatter, the soft giggles, the small voices telling stories that no longer trembled with fear. Each sound was a reminder of why they had chosen this path, why Dane had given everything. As the children ate, Hannah stood. Her eyes caught the fading light, her face glowing as she spoke softly. but clearly. We made a promise today, that here no one has to run anymore. That means this is our home, all of us. The children nodded, some with shy smiles, others with wide, eager grins. Sam leaned closer to her, his voice barely above a whisper. Even me, Hannah smiled, reaching for his hand. Especially you. Callie's tears spilled freely now, her hand pressing against her heart as she watched. Ethan's chest ached, but it was the kind of ache that came with healing, with knowing that the world could be rebuilt, piece by piece. As dusk settled, the clearing glowed with firelight from the porch lanterns. The children leaned against one another, their eyelids heavy, their bellies full. Callie hummed softly an old lullaby she had once sung to Noah in the darkest nights, now reborn into something tender and new. Ethan looked out across the meadow one last time that evening. The flowers swayed under the twilight sky, the pine above Dane's resting place standing tall and steady. He felt the presence there, not in the form of fur against his hand or a bark at his side, but in the stillness and the quiet courage that filled the air. He whispered softly so only the wind could hear, "We kept our promise, old friend." The night deepened, but the clearing never felt dark. The glow of the lanterns, the warmth of laughter, and the vow carved into the wood above the cabin door lit the world brighter than any star. And then, as if carried on the breeze itself, came the words. Words not spoken, yet felt deep in their bones. Sometimes miracles don't roar. They come quietly in the courage of a little girl, in the love of a mother, and in the loyalty of a dog. And with that, Dane's haven stood eternal, a light that would never go out.